Oh dear. Hey guys, and welcome to the Coffee and Coding Podcast, the show where we discuss everything there is to know about app development. In today's episode, I chat with iOS developer Tim Mikelj. We speak about building Apple Watch apps, working with Apple's natural language processing framework, and how he went from being a professional cyclist, racing against the likes of Bradley Wiggins no less, to start a career as a professional app developer. Now on to the show. One question before I officially start though is, how do I pronounce your surname?
That's a good one. People normally just attempt. So just Mikelj without the. It's like I wouldn't have a J. So some people say Mikelj J. So it's just a silent J basically. Mikelj.
Okay, cool. Because some of them I've done so far and I forget to ask, and then when it comes to like recording introduction, I'm like, I don't know if I'm saying it right. So no, Mikelj. Okay, perfect. So I guess to get started, this is something that's pretty interesting. So I was looking through your LinkedIn and I noticed that before you were an iOS developer, you were this is a quote, a high performance coach. And then talking to you earlier, you mentioned that you were a professional cyclist before this as well. So firstly, the professional cyclist, what level are we talking? Because I know nothing about professional cycling except for, Tour de France. So what are we talking about here?
Yeah, so I was cycling since I was very young. I started when I was about 13, and then I was just kind of progressing to the ranks. And then eventually, in a few years' time, I made it into a Slovenian national team. So it's kind of racing World Cup and stuff like that. I've raced a few races alongside Bradley Wiggins. You probably recognize that name.
So we're talking really serious professional racing.
Yeah, it was kind of a 24/7 job, I would say.
Okay, that's amazing. I would have had no idea. So how comes you stopped doing that, and where did the high performance coach come in?
So it was a really interesting point in my life. I was still very young when I was thinking about it, like 20, and then I was thinking, where do I want to see my life in the next, I don't know, 5-10 years? What do I want to do? And then also like being away from home a lot and away from family and traveling a lot and kind of having this potential for injuries and not being able to continue doing what I really love doing, which was cycling. That kind of, it made me consider like, what do I want to do? So then I said, you know what, I'm young right now. I have a chance to go explore the world and try to figure out something for myself. So I just decided to leave it. I kind of left it on the high for myself. So my last race was World Championship, but my teammate actually won it, which is a really, really nice experience. I was a part of that team. That was in Italy. That was back in 2013. And then kind of like the natural thing that I had an idea of what I want to try next. I didn't know what I want to do kind of thing, right? I just want to explore a few things. So the natural thing came to me was coaching. So I started like coaching some of my friends. I just asked them, would you like me to give you some kind of mindset coaching for these races that are coming up? And a few of them signed up and they say, okay, let's do this thing. And then, yeah, that was quite fun to do. So we just done kind of like progressive muscle relaxation and visualization and stuff, those kind of basic meditative stuff. And kind of, yeah, that was quite interesting. But then I wanted to take that to like a good level because I felt like, oh, okay, maybe I can do this. So that's when I came to UK. And then, yeah, I was just kind of doing a lot of public speaking events and trying to get the word out and get the clients. And I got a bunch of clients all over the world. Mainly, most of the work I've done was for free. I haven't made much money from it. And then eventually I realized that's not really me. It didn't feel like I fit into that world. I didn't feel like I fit into being a coach. So yeah, that's when I continued exploring like what's the thing I want to do. And then I tried, just had a bunch of different jobs, like anything from sales, technical support, recruitment. I've even done all the stuff like that. So I have a lot of empathy for all the recruiters reaching out now. Yeah, and then eventually I just thought, oh, maybe I should start programming. Like I worked in recruitment at the time, actually, and I thought I was actually extremely bad at it. I was working there about 4 months, and I couldn't get a job for one person. I couldn't get a job for them, right, as a recruiter. And I was like, all right, so how can I help those people, right? And then I was thinking, oh, maybe, and at that time I was kind of dabbling with the idea, maybe I was kind of looking into programming. Then I started to learn a little bit. I was like, maybe I can build an app for them that makes a CV. So, and then I made that app, put it on the App Store.
So this is the job. Is it Job Hunter? This is the Job Hunter app, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So you made this while you were a recruiter?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I was kind of selling it to my candidates. I'm like, if I can't get your job, just download this app. It will help you make your CV. So it had like a little, you press a button and it shows you some tips on what to write in which section. So yeah, and I've seen a lot of CVs when I was recruiting there. But yeah, so that was the first kind of little step into it. And then after that, I thought, I'm actually really enjoying this. It really occupies my mind, my brain. I really have to focus on it, and kind of, it's very overwhelming at the times. But yeah, I really started enjoying it, and it all went from there, really.
So what was it that drew you to programming then? From like, was it just like, what was the thought that was, I'm a recruiter, I'm deciding I'm going to go and learn how to build an app?
It was kind of, I was naturally looking for something that I can be good at, obviously, because you cannot be good straight off the bat with programming. You have to practice a lot and learn a lot. But I felt like it came quite naturally to me. And I kind of think in blocks, and kind of, I feel like I have a bit of an engineering mind. And also when I was really younger, I was always very technical. So I was putting radios apart and computers apart and trying to figure out how this whole thing works. So yeah, it's kind of from that, like having that technical aspect and so many elements, and actually building something from nothing, like that idea, I really like that, and I really connected to that. So that's when I thought, okay, I really need to give it a good go, and I want to make a career out of this.
So you built one app, and now I know that you've built, how many apps in total have you built for yourself?
I don't know, probably more than 10, something like that.
And you have, on the App Store now, you have how many that people could still go and look at?
I got 3. So 2 for iPhone. One of them works on the iPad as well, and another one is an standalone Apple Watch app. That's the latest one. So
what was the inspiration? So for example, the Job Hunter app, that's very clear why you decided to go that route. And then you've got a cycling app. I noticed you've got an augmented reality app, which I definitely want to dig into a little bit. But kind of what was the inspiration for those, and how comes you decided to build your own apps rather than just, working for someone? So
I guess initially the thought was, I want to learn as much as I can. And the way I learn is by building something, by actually not just like reading at a book and writing a few lines of code. I need to have like a project or an app in mind that I can build and get to completion. That's when I felt like I learned something. So that was kind of initially, but then at the same time, I was trying to, all of these apps are mainly like my learning projects, and you can see like the progression through them and the way they look and behave and the kind of functionality they have, they kind of progress. But I wanted to explore different APIs. So the first one is just like basic layout and spitting out a PDF. The second one was used location manager. The third one used ARKit. Now the latest one is working a lot with HealthKit. So it's kind of like they're all very different, and that's kind of my goal with them. To always, when I build something new, I want to delve into a new API that I haven't explored before. This seems quite cool.
So are they more portfolio projects?
Yeah, they're mainly at this stage. Obviously, there's always like this thing at the back of my mind. Like it'd be great if they go somewhere, but I haven't actively done much towards that. So mainly my focus just to get as much code and as much practice in as possible, and really push on that. I didn't want to get too distracted in doing too much marketing and just do stuff like that.
So they're purely just things that interest you?
Yeah, they really are. So the latest app that I built for Apple Watch is basically something that I'm missing like on other platforms with. So I use Strava a lot when I go on my bike. But one thing I miss in Strava, I have to look on my watch while I'm riding my bike. And I feel like that's quite unsafe, right? And especially if you're going downhill. So what I've done is I just build in like a little speech feedback. So you can set it how often it gives you feedback and tells you stats in your ears. So I just have my AirPod in and I go and I don't have to look at my watch. So just kind of that kind of like quite a simple solution, I would say. And doing that, also learning a new API that I haven't been doing before. So it's kind of, yeah, it all goes hand in hand, I guess.
Yeah, that's really nice. What's the name of that specific app?
It's called Triad. It's like triathlon without long. You can do running, cycling, and swimming. The swimming functionality, I haven't focused much on that, but running and cycling are pretty cool. So you can construct custom intervals on the app and it will loop through them. So you can actually do a custom proper interval workout. So you can actually train with it. And it syncs with health kits, so it's pretty cool.
All right, very nice. So the other question I wanted to ask about your apps was, so you have an augmented reality app. How difficult or easy was it to get started with that?
To be honest, that's probably the one of the apps that has the least code that I've written. It's actually pretty simple to create something quite straightforward, right? It just kind of, I think like building apps, and especially like working in a full-time job, we're kind of used to working a lot in a 2D way, whereas in AR you have to think a bit more 3D and you have like 3 planes to play with, and then you need to recognize like what the surroundings are. So it's quite simple. Like the ARKit API, I think when I built that, it was ARKit 1 or 2, so it was still quite early. But yeah, you just basically scan your surroundings, create like recognize a flat plane, and based on that flat plane, you set your geometry and how the object will be positioned in the room or in the space, and it just stays there. It's just the framework does majority of the heavy lifting for you, so it's really not hard. So you kind of you recognize that, and then so I made my app is Pocket Planets, so it's basically showing you all the planets from our solar system in AR. So you can only choose them individually, but it's basically just a ball, like a figure of a ball wrapped in an image. So it's really like a really simple concept. But it was quite interesting to build it and kind of try to think in that sort of way. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I've never done anything 3D. I think I only think in 2D space when I'm trying to build an app. And then the fact that you just said the word geometry in my head, it's like, oh my God, it's so complicated. But it sounds like if it does a lot of the heavy lifting for you, then that's something that could be pretty easy for people to get started with.
Yeah, I guess when you want to make something really custom and more complicated, and like some fancy animations, that I can imagine become quite difficult quickly. But as with everything, I think it's quite easy to start.
Okay, nice. So another question that I missed or that I had was, how different is it building an app for a watch as opposed to building an app for a phone?
To be honest, it's that was a part of the experiment when I'm building the app. So I'm using this architecture called Clean Swift, which is basically similar to Viper. So the data flow goes in a circle, and what I'm just building just now is the phone, so iPhone counterpart for the same app, trying to reuse as much code as possible. So it's basically it's quite easy to build it in a way that you only have to swap the view layer, and just kind of plug it in. And especially, yeah, if you use any kind of decent pattern, I would say, or MVM would work with that pretty well as well, I guess. You just swap the view layer, but like the whole logic behind it can be completely, like, can be exactly the same. It's only the only difference, I guess, I would say, is obviously because the watch has a lot of sensors, right? So it can recognize your heart rate and stuff like that. So especially because it's a workout-based app, on an iPhone, you would have to check if the person has like a Bluetooth connected strap or they don't have anything. So you're a little bit more limited with that. So I guess to work with HealthKit, like and Health API, it's very straightforward on the watch. It was just quite difficult initially to deploy it because that was one of my. So it's only last year at WW19 that Apple announced you can build independent Apple Watch apps, whereas before you needed to have like a buddy iPhone app. And this was the first time when a new platform was announced that since I was programming on Apple, that I thought, okay, I want to be there on the first day. So I kind of released that in the first few days after Apple WatchOS became an independent platform. It was quite difficult to find some docs on that and some answers on how to actually publish it because, I followed everything that Apple said, but then they were rejecting it. And I was like, why? But then I figured out it was just some configuration stuff. So it was quite straightforward.
Okay, so that's pretty cool. So you would have been one of the first Apple Watch apps that's purely on the watch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So a question, just to look back to the transition from being a recruiter to being a developer, how much do you think it helped that you had your own apps? Because, so for example, you were a recruiter. I assume you learnt from, YouTube or Google or, that kind of stuff to teach yourself. So you didn't have any, quote unquote formal education. So how difficult did you find it getting your first role as a developer? And do you feel like those portfolio apps that you'd built helped you do that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So it's not that I went straight from recruitment to my first job. I've done like a little technical support role for O2 for about a year. So just kind of like I sold it in a way like I'm in tech, but I really want to start coding at all the interviews. So and I'm doing all this stuff on the side. But yeah, I feel like for me personally, having and not having a computer science background, having own portfolio apps was vital to getting my first proper job. And I think, and whoever like asks me now and comes to me like, oh, I really want to get into iOS and doing this and this now, it's like, build a few apps, put them on the App Store, everyone's going to want you. Because to be honest, there's not many developers out there, we all know, that have their own apps, and you say like you stand out immediately just by having that, and it just shows general enthusiasm for it, I guess, and you learn so much through it, and I guess it's and the only really really hard thing to learn is how to adopt good practices, because Apple is renowned for not promoting very good practices in terms of decoupling, just putting everything in a view controller and having everything coupled. So that's the hard bit to learn, I guess, and that's what makes a senior eventually, I would say, like kind of progressing through that and kind of learning all these bits.
You set me up for a good segue here, which is I wanted to talk about the article that you'd written on Medium. 3 things that make a professional programmer. Maybe you want to just kind of give a brief overview of that, and I guess if there's any other thoughts that you would want to add to that for people that haven't read it.
Yeah, that was a while ago I've written it. I actually made some notes for that because I went back to it. So what did I have? So first one was to take on feedback. I feel like this point just became emphasized since I've written that. Like, it makes total sense. So I think as a professional programmer, you really need to learn to take feedback and ask for feedback, because that's like, it's literally the most efficient and the quickest way to learn, in my opinion. Like doing PRs and not shying away from like including as many people as possible from your team into that PR, so they can all like, there was a few times I've done that. I'm like, just throw it at me, whatever you got, please just give it to me so I can learn something from it. And I feel like doing that really helped me to learn and adopt good practices, because it's much easier to sometimes to look at somebody else's code and say, oh, this could be better, this could be better. But once you're building a feature and you're really in it, and you know all the moving parts, and you try to keep that at the forefront of your mind and build that thing, then sometimes you miss something. But kind of developing that, being able to think on the go and writing clean code as you go, I think that's what takes a bit of practice, and I think taking on feedback really helps with that. So that'll definitely be first point. And then, like anyone I ever spoke to, refactoring is a constant, I guess. Like when you look at your like 3-month-old code, I was like, what the hell have I written here?
It's always garbage. Everything you wrote in the past is just the worst. Yeah.
I actually came to that point that I don't want to look at some of my old apps that I've written, because I just feel embarrassed. And it's that's probably a little bit extreme, and just kidding really. But I think because you kind of your code base improves with you, I guess, as you go along. Yeah, the third point was code when you don't feel like it. I guess that's one of the bits that I definitely brought forward from that I learned in sport. It's like, if you want to be good at something, the times when you really start mastering something, when you do it at the times when you also don't feel like it, you know, like just kind of drawing a parallel with when I was cycling. There were so many times I just didn't want to go on my bike. Like everything hurt me from the day before, or I was just really tired. But I knew that if I go on my bike now, that's when I'll make a difference, and that's when I'll make up and catch up to the other guys, or become better at some points as well. So I think it's exactly the same with programming. So it was for the first couple of years when I was learning, there was about, I don't know, 80% of the time I didn't feel like it, because it was too challenging, and I was like, how do I wrap my head around this? But I was just pushing myself to do it, and kind of, because I knew that this is either going to be kind of long and gnarly, or short and a bit more stingy. So, and I always prefer that, short and stingy, and really go into it and try to really take on as much as possible quickly. And for me, I find it very rewarding. So you almost get it's a kind of a stoic way of thinking about generally about life, I guess. Just like when you don't feel like doing something, and you go down low, and you really don't feel like, and you feel like, oh, this is crap. And I'm not saying that you should do that all the time, but then you also get that high on the other end, and feel like, wow, this is absolutely brilliant. And sometimes, you know, this 10 minutes every week you get when you feel like a Mozart writing code, you know.
I could totally relate to that, because especially with my own apps, you know, when you come back to it after a year, because you have to update it, and you look at the code and it's like, oh, this is horrible, I don't want to do it. But you have to kind of power through. And especially when it comes to going back to old code, because you can't, it's really hard to build features in code that you feel is bad. So you have to get past that hump of, I need to redo this, or I need to do something I really don't want to do, so that I can get to the point that I can now build on it. So I could totally relate to that point. So firstly, how comes you decided to start writing Medium articles? I guess is a good question, because I do the same, but I'm really interested to know what your reason for that is.
It's kind of two reasons. So one of them is sometimes I felt like I was rushing through things too much. It's about that process that you have to go through, like really understanding something before you can explain it to someone else. I feel like you have to have that extra bit of understanding about that thing that you're talking about an API or a bit of code or something. Yeah, and you just don't get that by not writing. It kind of forces you to really think it through. So I guess that does one. And second one was I just wanted to get my profile up a little bit as a part of it, but it was more like a consequence rather than a goal. So but yeah, it definitely comes into it, because it definitely helps to have something on your CV that you've written a few articles. And yeah, it's always useful to show.
Yeah, I think I've read or I've heard, this is not an exact quote, but essentially the pinnacle of your understanding is how well you can explain things to other people. Because when you can explain it to someone else, then you've got it. So being able to write about it, yeah, it's definitely a good one. So you wrote an article about machine learning recently. If I understood this right, because I've read it, but I want to make sure that I remember it right, which was, it was a to-do app, and you write down, I need to get some bananas today, and then using the Apple natural language framework, it would then grab a picture of bananas.
Yeah, that's right. So it's quite a simple idea, and I was just trying to explore like what could you do like in a really easy way with natural language framework. I just kind of dabbled with it for a little bit, and then I said, okay, like how do you take your good old boring to-do app and make it a bit more interesting, a bit more kind of feel a bit more intuitive? I guess that's the right word, because that's what AI helps you to do, right? And so basically what it does, it scans. So that's all. It uses on-device processing, right? The framework, it doesn't post anything to the servers, which is pretty cool. So it scans the text that you input as your to-do item, and then it finds any verbs and nouns, and then I use that as a search term in I use the Pixabay API and just download the first few images and choose a random one.
So you set up the framework to say, scan this text for verbs or nouns, and then it gives you back, I assume, some sort of list that says, these are all the verbs that I think were in this sentence. And then you take that and you go to Pixabay and say, go and get me pictures of these.
Yeah, so let's say you put in a to-do item, buy bananas, right? So you got bananas in there. It throws you that keyword out. I use that as a search term and download an image. Or you put in an item, go running. So you got a verb running there. And I use that and I download picture of running. So and I put it next to it. So it's kind of like a very like, it only takes maybe like less than 100 lines of code, the whole thing, I would say. But I think it's quite a lightweight and easy way to classify, to kind of and understand the language the user is using. I guess you could use that in other ways, like because you can get a sentiment score from a text. That's a really interesting one.
What would be an example of that?
A sentiment score is basically how positive or negative a string is. So it just evaluates it. So let's say you write something positive. I'm really happy today. That'd be a 1. And was I'm really angry at someone. That would be a -1. So it's on between -1 and a 1. It gives you like kind of a number out. And yeah, it's quite interesting. And most of the time, it actually gets it right. And yeah, I guess I don't know. You could use some real world use case example. Let's say your good old messaging app, right? You could do some on-device processing. Your friend is writing something to you. So let's say you have a one-to-one conversation in a messaging app, and they write 3 messages in a row that were quite positive. Let's say they were celebrating something good happened. You could just throw some confetti in the app, right? Or I don't know, if they write something that makes them feel down, or they're struggling with something, you could recognize that the sentiment score at that time is quite low. You could show them some hearts or something. So it's quite a nice little way to improve an app. And I guess there are many other ways in which you can use that, but it's almost like introducing empathy to the apps. That's how I see it.
Is there any other not use cases? I don't know what the terms would be, but you could have like nouns, or you could have verbs, or you could have sentiment. Is there any other types that it gives you?
Yeah, there's a bunch of other things. You can recognize the language that something's being written in. I think it supports about more than 10 languages, definitely. I don't know of many other ones from the top of my head, but there's a few other things that it can recognize, yeah.
All right. Going off in my head right now is I have an app that reads like WhatsApp messages and stuff to you and lets you voice reply. And one of the biggest requests for features I get is to be able to reply in different languages. So that could be, I'm definitely gonna Google that after this and see.
That's great. Yeah, that's awesome.
So last few questions. So one that I like to ask everyone is, what machine do you use to work from?
I just use I have it provided from, because I work for a bank, for a Tesco bank just now. I used the one they give me, so just a 13-inch MacBook Pro.
I thought you were going to say Windows. I was going to say, oh
No,
no.
I mean, there's a way to run Xcode on Windows, isn't it? It's very difficult. So it's a good excuse, right, to have a Mac. I love a Mac. And I have a little setup at home now, just working from home. So nothing too special. Just an extra monitor, keyboard and mouse, and that's about it.
So you've kind of touched on this already with your, traits that you think a professional developer should have. But so a question that I like to ask everyone is, what do they think separates a okay developer from a good developer, or a great developer even? You've touched on a bunch of points that could fall in there, and I was wondering if you think, because you could have a professional bad developer and you could also have a professional, really good developer. So what do you think separates a okay developer from a great developer?
Oh, this is the one I heard from like a lot from other people, and I kind of seen it myself. Like, you can have people who are very smart but not very business savvy, and I think that's quite important, and it's often neglected. You kind of have to understand that we're not writing code just for the fun of it and try to make it all nice and modular just for the fun of it. You need to kind of see that bigger picture. So like, these are the business needs. This is how the business can request this to happen. And those are all eventualities. And that's why we try to write code in the way we write it. So it's a lot of times in the community, you see, it's really nice to decouple and solid principles, but there's kind of missing the point and why we're actually doing this. Like, it's all good and fun to write good and clean code, but why are we actually doing it? And I think also connecting it on a kind of day-to-day basis with the stakeholders or whoever you're working with in a team, or even yourself. It's exact same. And then also I think another one is constant learning. Just it's never ending. Like, I try to spend, I don't know, I would say a few days a week, at least an hour or two, to learn something new or to practice something. And then I guess general enthusiasm for it as well, because I guess if you don't have that enthusiasm and the real love for it, the whole industry moves forward so quickly that I would imagine, I don't know, I really love it. I always say that. And that's why it's not hard for me to keep up. But I've seen people who just don't enjoy it that much. They just do it for their job, and they're sometimes struggling to keep up with all the changes. It makes sense. So I think that really, it makes you kind of at the forefront if you're really enthusiastic about it, kind of naturally.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And the business savvy, that's definitely something that I would say is pretty maybe rare. A lot of people, they don't seem to realize that somebody's not paying you to write clean code. They're paying you to build this one thing. How you go and do it is up to you. But, if you got 3 weeks to do it, then you can't come back and say, well, it took me 3 weeks to set up the framework, because that does not fly.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree.
All right, awesome. So that's all the questions from me. So where would you like people to find you, or where can I direct people to after this episode?
They're probably best on LinkedIn. I have a kind of semi-up-to-date profile on LinkedIn. Just my first name, last name. I think it's only one Tim Mikelj in the world, which is pretty cool as well. Feel free to connect with me. I'd love to.
Big thanks to today's guest, Tim Mikelj. You can find him on LinkedIn, and you can read the articles we discuss in this podcast on Medium. You can also find his personal apps for the iPhone and Apple Watch on the App Store. As always, you can find everything we talked about in this episode in the show notes. If you like the show, tell a friend, and don't forget to subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating. It's much appreciated. And if you really like the show, you can support it with a coffee donation at coffeeandcodingpod.com/buymecoffee. Caffeine is literally what fuels this podcast. If you'd like to connect with like-minded developers, you can do so in our Facebook community. And finally, you can follow me on your favourite social media platform at lowcarbrob. You can find all the links to everything I've just said in the show notes or at coffeeandcodingpod.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Coffee and Coding Podcast.